Hello and welcome everyone to the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance's policy update. Today is August 6th, 2024. My name is Ron Quarant. I'm here with my amazing policy experts and friends, Dina Ellis and Adam Goldberg. Dina, Adam, since last we met, not a lot has happened. The sitting president who was running is now no longer running. The vice president is running with a new running mate. The market collapsed a little bit and then started coming back today. The SEC changed some lawsuits. There's a lot going on. Dina, let's kick off. You and I started chatting yesterday, and we generally make these freeform. But before I begin, I'm sorry. Our usual disclaimers, everyone. Obviously, please do keep in mind that everything we discuss is not considered accounting, investment, legal, tax, or policy advice. Obviously, these are our own opinions and don't necessarily represent the opinions of our firms. If anyone is watching us on LinkedIn Live or Twitter or Facebook, and you've got questions, please hit up Dina or Adam in chat, and someone is trying to reach one of you very eagerly. If you can put that on quiet, that'd be good. But Dina, let's talk. What are we seeing here with, has the Democratic Party shifted its position on crypto post Nashville?
I think it's, well, first of all, there's supposed to be a meeting that's set up with some of the senior advisors, with the now presidential candidate Harris, and that has been pushed back a bit. But I really think it's too soon to tell. And to be fair, I've always said this, that regardless of, I remember during the Trump administration, that administration wasn't particularly fond of crypto either. And, we've had similar, maybe, much more hard hitting through Gensler in this administration. So I think, either side could be very tough or just as tough on the AML and KYC components, which those are significant components.
Adam, weigh in on this. One of the things we talked about in prior meetings, it's interesting. I originally approached it when I saw former President Trump really engaging in crypto, and I believe there's now outreach from the Harris campaign, from the colleagues and people in the crypto space. I saw it as a very cynical approach to A, fundraising, and B, kind of getting the margin of votes, the 1 or 2% in certain locations that will matter. Adam, am I wrong?
Well, I think it would be more cynical if, let's say, they came out with some policy proposals similar to that Trump came out with. Like if he showed up at the summit that he was at, the Bitcoin conference, and announced some equivalent of the Bitcoin reserve or something the industry had been asking for. Yeah. Actually, what I think from her approach, at least so far, is kind of exactly the kind of approach you would expect for someone that's not trying to be nailed down on policy, at least at the beginning. I think that's one of the things we've seen that's been pretty standard for the Harris team so far in this couple weeks. She hasn't done many interviews. There hasn't been any robust policy proposals that have been released on any subjects. What she's really done is more embraced the agenda Biden was running on, especially in the areas where she had conflicting positions when she was running for the nomination herself in 2020. The fracking ban comes to mind, where basically she ran on saying she wanted to ban fracking. Now she fully supports the Biden position, which is very open to fracking. So I think one thing the industry should take away from this period is, so two things. First, I do think the industry may have got a little over their skis with kind of going all in with the Trump campaign when it looked like he was going to win. I mean, obviously you saw that in betting markets, you saw that in polls. He had become a prohibitive favorite following the debate and some of the issues Biden was having. At least as of today, we have a completely new race. If anything, it's a toss-up. It's probably, you look at some of the models, I think Nate Silver had Harris taking the lead for the first time yesterday. We've seen almost all the national polls that have come out recently have been pro-Harris. The state polls have been lagging, but also movement towards her end. And I think that's one thing, you always have a danger when you're lobbying. You don't want to be seen as partisan. You don't want to be seen as favoring one side or the other, because then if the side you choose doesn't win and you don't back the winner, that could be bad. So I think what's important to know now is, I think the Harris administration and the Harris campaign is far more open to ideas from industry than, let's say, the Biden campaign or a second Biden administration would have been. Biden is much more linked to a lot of the elites in DC. He's been a member of the Senate for 6 decades, and then for 5 decades, and then he was Obama's vice president for 8 years. He's has long ties to the last 3 or 4 Democratic administrations. So he had a huge pool of people he had worked with and people he was comfortable with to come serve in the administration. Harris is very different. I mean, Harris, she obviously served a term in the Senate. And she's been the vice president for less than 4 years, but really her background is more California, Silicon Valley, San Francisco. She was the prosecutor in San Francisco specifically. She has a lot of ties to Pelosi and a lot of the other people there. One thing to know there is obviously very close to Silicon Valley. So she's very deep ties to a lot of people in Silicon Valley. They've been some of her biggest funders throughout the years. It's been noted that her brother-in-law is Tony West, who's the chief general counsel at Uber. So obviously has more of those fintech technology innovation ties than, let's say, you would have expected from Biden. And that does give an opening to the industry where, while she's still formulating a position, because I think you're right, there will be cynical motives. Can we pick off, maybe, let's say Trump gained 1 or 2% from these crypto voters?
Yeah.
Can we cut that edge? Can maybe instead of 2%, can we make it 1%? Can we make it under 0.5%, depending on the policies they take? And I think also, if she were to win, her appointments will be much more likely to come from outside of DC than from inside of DC. So you could see people from Silicon Valley, from California, from the tech industry, from the banking industry, potentially coming into the administration, where that would not have been my expectation if Biden was to gain a second term.
Adam, thanks so much. Dina, weigh in on this. And, following on the point that Adam raises here, when you look at the Democratic Party, getting President Biden to step aside in favor of Vice President Harris, is some of what we're hearing from the campaign a bit of a repudiation of I won't call them anti-crypto army, but the Elizabeth Warren, Gensler, Sherrod Brown block within the Democratic Party? Is it a repudiation of that kind of perspective on this industry?
I mean, I would say, just by the nature of her background of being, tied to Silicon Valley, being from California, and all the things that Adam is saying in itself gives her a different perspective. So I think there's that.
Yeah.
But I don't think they've really committed to anything specific. They're saying, we have an open door. There's a friendly posture there. So, the question becomes, is this friendly posture, our lobbyists and others that are talking to the campaign, are they able to use that and turn it into something that can, become law or become something that's, permanent in a regulation or something like that?
Thank you, Dina. Adam, one more follow-up to that. We had this conversation yesterday in our WSBA legal working group. I suspect we'll have the discussion in other working groups as well. Adam, when we kind of look at the politics of the election season, we've talked about it vis-a-vis crypto and blockchain. Is what's happening in the political sphere informing some of the actions or activities of the regulators? And I'm not necessarily saying, Chair Gensler is not going to have the SEC pull away from some of the suits, for example. But we have seen some changes. For example, the SEC amending the Binance case. For the people who may not know, Adam, how much does election season figure into the day-to-day of regulators that we know?
Oh, so first off, I would say as a caveat, you would hope it doesn't, right? Because
Fair
they're
point.
supposed to be independent. They're supposed to be Senate confirmed. That's one of the reasons we have independent commissions who are Senate confirmed. They're supposed to be remote from politics, but we all know that's not the way it works. Yeah, I mean, Chair Gensler, as the chair of the SEC, sits on the Financial Stability Oversight Council, which is chaired by the Treasury Secretary, Secretary Yellen. She is obviously a political appointee, as are mostly everyone on that council. And so you would hope, first off, that it doesn't. What I would say in practice is you definitely see it doesn't. It's one of the major advantages of incumbency. You can do things from what Republicans and conservatives would refer to as the administrative state, or generally just taking different policy positions that could be helpful for you in your reelection. A classic example is when Trump ran in 2020, he granted recognition to the Hopi tribe in North Carolina. They had previously voted for Democrats for decades. He gave them formal recognition by the Office of Indian Affairs, gave them a tract of land in North Carolina, then they voted overwhelmingly for Trump. That happens. That's one of the reasons incumbents are elected. I think it's 70% of presidential incumbents have been elected. It's almost 90% of senators and governors. One of the reasons is you have that ability to influence policy. It's not just, I'm going to put out a policy paper and that may or may not happen years down the road if I'm elected. You can do something tomorrow. So you, again, would hope that's not influencing, but I think candidly, I think most neutral observers would say some of the walk back on SAB 121 that we've heard in private may have been part of that. This Binance example, and I think we'll get into it a little more, is a little harder to read. I've heard different perspectives. I've heard SEC really is not trying to be as aggressive. I've heard also, well, really these tokens don't really matter to the heart of the case and they're not really changing their overall view. They're just trying to win this litigation, which is certainly possible. But I think most people were expecting seeing how much the GOP has embraced crypto and the industry. I think the general counsel from Coinbase was seen at a couple of Trump fundraisers around the Tennessee Bitcoin conference you were at, and other industry luminaries have formed this pact to support Republicans ostensibly that are pro crypto, that there would be a desire from the Democrats to eat into that somewhat if they could. And again, it really comes down to, is there policy or positions you could take that you don't view as harmful to your overall agenda, but could be good politics and could win votes? So I would say you hope it doesn't happen, but it does.
Adam, really good point. Dina, correct me if I'm wrong. We've been talking about Vice President Harris and her campaign. Answer the one question everyone that's not an attorney or a Washington insider keeps asking us, which is, why can't President Trump, if he wins, fire Chair Gensler?
Oh, well, well, it's a Senate confirmed, term position. However, so he cannot be fired without, very strong cause, which some may argue that there is, but there's, it's got to be like fraud or something like that. But, he could be, sort of the things could be moved around where one of the Republican commissioners becomes the acting chair, while they like kind of move him into just a regular slot. So no, he cannot be fired, but he can definitely be demoted. So
Adam, to following up on that, and again, you were both part of our legal working group meeting yesterday. You've got to imagine a man like Gary Gensler, who's got the lay of the land in D.C., is not going to settle for junior commissioner position, all due respect to the other commissioners on the SEC, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't expect so. And I think one thing to analyze when looking at these is, so sometimes you have someone who, let's say, is not an old Washington hand. I think the FDIC commissioner during the Trump administration was relatively new to positions, relatively new to a senior position like that. She refused to leave. Eventually, there was some ways where she was not made the chairman. Eventually, she left. For someone like Gensler was an assistant treasury secretary in the Clinton administration. He was the CFTC chairman for 4 years in the Obama administration and left after his term was up voluntarily without any issue. Similarly, it's a matter of comedy and practice that when your administration loses, if you're the chairman, since the president picks the chairman, typically the chairman will depart. While technically they can stay on as a minority commissioner, it's simply just something that's not done. I mean, you even saw it as, I think Jay Clayton had some time left on his seat, and he immediately left the second Trump lost to open up the chairman slot. So President Biden, this is something that is done. And especially, I think the older the Washington hand you're dealing with, the much likelier they are to respect those institutional norms that we talk about. Resigning once your party loses is one of those institutional norms. If you're a chairman, for a minority commissioner, completely different. If you're talking about the two Democratic commissioners currently serving, I know they've been nominated for different positions, but if they want it to stay, that is very normal. If you have more time on your term and you're one of the non-chairman commissioners,
Yeah.
typically you will stay from administration to administration. We see that all the time, especially with how hard it is to get people confirmed. But when you're talking about the chairman, almost always the chairman is going to resign because it's the president's prerogative to put who they want to be the chairman.
So say the former president stating he would fire the chair on day one is more fodder for the stump speech, correct?
I would say far more likely if Trump were to win, Gary Gensler will tender his resignation as effective as of January 21st at 1 p.m. when Trump is sworn in.
Adam, Dina, thank you both so much. I want to rip up the script a little bit. We didn't prepare for this, so you can yell at me after the broadcast. One of the conversations we've been having within our colleagues and members at the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance and colleagues within traditional TradFi itself has been obviously everyone's seen the markets, 1,000-point drops yesterday. Overseas markets have had a difficult time. It was a difficult Friday. It was a difficult Monday. Today, a little bit better. The market's picking up a little bit. But one of the conversation points, Adam, let's start with you, is how does a Vice President Harris, who's now running for president, substantiate or run on Bidenomics? You know, there's impact and thought about what's the macroeconomic landscape? How does that affect crypto? How does that affect other asset classes? Do you think running on Bidenomics will be a winner for the vice president?
Well, so far the economic polling has not. So just the economy has not been the strongest issue for the Democrats. Or, I mean, I can make you an objective case as to why I think it would be great for them to run on the economy. You could point to GDP, which is far higher than the Trump administration. You could point even to the stock market, which even after yesterday was up 60% in Biden's term,
Right.
which matches the entire Trump term. Also still up 8%, 9% on the S&P, even despite yesterday's drop. We've already gained back, I think, more than half of the drop today. Similar in Japan, that dropped 11%, 12%, and it's gained 10% yesterday. This day, their market closed. So I think you could run on that message, but I think what is shaping up is it seems, at least the Harris theory of the case, at least from my understanding, is they think Trump is a weak candidate. They always have. And that was one of the reasons Democrats were so clamoring to get Biden out, is they thought this guy is weak. He's a convicted felon. He has all these negatives. His unfavorables are very high. If you just run the standard Democratic campaign that they ran in 2018, that they ran in 2019, that they ran in 2020, they ran in 2021, 2022, 2023, and even 2024 with the ballot referendums and special elections, Democrats should come on top of that, and that means running on choice. Mostly that would be the biggest issue, not on the economy. On the economy, you'll see these class warfare arguments that people like to talk about: raise taxes on the rich to give benefits to the middle class. I think that's one of the areas Biden and Harris have a very strong case to make, because they did raise taxes on the rich and the economy boomed. They did expand the child tax credit, which cut poverty in half. Those are the kind of proposals I would expect them to run on. But the bread and butter economic arguments you would expect people to run on, which is incredibly low unemployment, very good GDP, strong stock market, record energy production, they're not really running on those because inflation has made people sour on the economy. Even you can tell them all the metrics in the world, but people don't like to hear that their wages went up more than inflation, and that's one of the reasons it's been a tough case for them, even with inflation fall.
Adam, we do have colleagues that would push back a little bit on the quote unquote booming economy. We'll leave that for another session. Dina, I'm going to go provocative. Is Adam correct about Harris running on Bidenomics?
I mean, my feeling is that she still is in her honeymoon and still introducing who she is to the country and doing as much as she can to take advantage of that honeymoon, which makes a lot of sense. And I don't really think we have yet gotten to a lot of the policy. And I don't know, did the debate finally has the debate been finalized at all between the two of them?
I stopped watching the news when the Dow dropped.
No, there is no current debate scheduled.
So
Trump pulled out of the ABC debate and proposed the Fox debate, which is not going to happen.
Right. So, I mean, it would be nice to be able to see, her in a debate, or the both of them in the debate. But yeah, so I think I really feel like we're still in this mode of, and so yeah, you're right. Some of those issues with with abortion and things like that are playing a significant role in terms of like her introduction to the country and her introduction to women and exciting a lot of women to want to come out and vote.
Dina, Adam, thank you both. I want to pivot a little bit. We've talked about the SEC a lot, not without reason, but there are two cases that really jump to front of mind. One is the recent announcement by the Securities and Exchange Commission to amend the Binance case. I'm probably not doing justice to the actual wording, but essentially, some of the tokens they raised in the Binance case, they are now asking the court to remove from consideration as securities. Adam, again, we have this conversation a lot, and in the chair's perspective, the embodiment of an investment contract is part of the conversation. Howey test applies. Why would the regulator pull certain tokens from a suit against Binance at this point?
Well, so this is where it gets a little complicated. And again, I think some of the initial reporting on this, I think I got better educated by our calls and speaking to some other people really experts in the litigation. So one thing to know is this case already survived summary judgment. So basically, if the SEC had a weak case, presumably they would have lost the summary judgment. The case would have been dismissed. Case survived summary judgment, meaning it's going to go to trial.
Yep.
Discovery is commenced. And what it seems like is the judge was very skeptical of these secondary market sale arguments, as you said, around the nature of an investment contract for these other tokens that weren't really at issue in the case. Yes, Binance listed them, but the really crux of the case is the Binance token. It's seen as a security because Binance is the company. They created a token to allow interoperability on their own exchange. It allows you to exchange with other tokens, but really the Binance token itself is really the heart of the litigation.
Yep.
So what some have posited is that the SEC has dropped two of these, which I believe is the Avalanche token and the token related to Solana. I believe those are the two tokens that were pulled out. And one of the reasons is these tokens really don't have anything to do with the case except being listed on the Binance exchange. They are not named as parties to the case, which again, the judge was extremely skeptical of. He's like, if you're going to name these people and say that their token is a security, they should be part of the case. They should be parties. They should be able to defend themselves. So they pulled that out. So it could be strategic. Basically, we think we can win the case without these two tokens. We don't need them. Also, could be thinking ahead. We don't want an adverse precedent where we win the case against Binance, but it says that, let's say, these two tokens, Solana and Avalanche tokens, are actually not securities, which could harm other litigation where those same tokens are cited as securities. So, at least I am more of that view that it does not portend some sea change in SEC enforcement or the way SEC is looking at something. I think it seems a more strategic maneuver on this specific case itself.
And Adam, to that point, Dina, following on that, to be very clear, no one in the industry should presume that this is the Security and Exchanges Commission note that Solana, for example, is not a security. This doesn't necessarily change. I'm using Chair Gensler just as kind of the archetype of the conversations in the SEC. This does not change Chair Gensler's perspective that Solana, these tokens may actually be securities.
That's correct. I mean, you still have to assume that they are securities, but looking at it through the political lens, which is not the legal lens, right? So the legal lens would say, no, presume that these are still securities, and you've got to comply with the securities laws. Depending on what your product looks like and your risk tolerance. But what was I going to say? But I cannot remember where
That's okay.
I apologize.
No, that's okay. We can move on from that because the other case that has come up, certainly in between me watching flashing red or green on the screen for global markets, Adam, is the Coinbase case. And if I remember reading correctly this morning, the judge in SEC v. Coinbase has pushed back on, or I don't want to say declined, Coinbase's request for an entire series of communication from the SEC, including, I believe, the judge rejected their request for Chair Gensler's personal emails or something. What is the context of this case, and is Coinbase overreaching in your opinion?
Well, I don't know if they're overreaching. I think the job of a good legal defense, and obviously Coinbase is going to get the best legal defense money can buy because they're a huge now company with billions of dollars in assets and can afford to pay lawyers, whatever, is to explore every possible legal argument that could be beneficial to your clients. If you were able to get any of this discovery they were seeking, obviously it would be beneficial to them. I think both Dina would tell you and I would tell you the chance of them getting those kind of communications are just very unlikely to happen, especially from the chairman. I mean, judges do grant certain comity and privilege to people running agencies to have confidential communications with their subordinates. That's really known as executive privilege in the presidential context. But in these type of litigations, enforcement actions, just because you're charged with an enforcement action does not allow you to open up the entire SEC chairman's email box and read whatever you want. So do I think they're being overzealous? No, but I do think that they're exploring every possible legal avenue they think that will help their clients, and also making the job as tough as possible for the SEC lawyers who have to respond to every one of these potential motions and asks for discovery, even if, again, it's very unlikely to succeed. I think a lot of lawyers, the likelihood to succeed test, I think of many people would have said, let's say the Trump immunity arguments and other arguments he made to the Supreme Court were unlikely to succeed. So why are they doing them? And they ended up succeeding. So sometimes you make a long shot argument and it's accepted by a judge. And also, as I said, it forces the SEC to spend more time and resources on this litigation, which maybe they're willing to do, but that does take away bandwidth to do other cases.
So, Adam, to be very clear on that, and Dina, certainly please weigh in. We're not very specifically talking about in the cases of regulatory chairpersons, specifically privilege. There is precedent to grant them some deference in the courts, but they don't have a privilege claim, correct?
No, I don't believe there's a privilege play at all.
Okay, understood. So I guess we've got limited time, Adam, Dina. There's still so much to cover. I guess I want to ask, we've got a new vice presidential running mate I'm going back to politics, I'm sorry, for Vice President Harris. Adam, you and I were messaging earlier today. I don't think Governor Walz has stated anything publicly about crypto. But Dina, Adam, if you had a wager, where do you think the governor would land in the world of crypto?
I mean,
I've left you both speechless.
Well, it's a little hard to pin down only because, so for example, when he was in Congress, which is probably the biggest thing we know, as I said, at the state level, it's really hard to find anything they did. They did pass this minor regulation on like Bitcoin kiosks that limited the amount of money you could get to like 2,000 per week. But that's really the only thing I think I could find publicly on Walz's stance on crypto or digital assets. In the Congress, he was known for being very bipartisan. He was from a Trump plus 10 district, which he won multiple times. Yeah, I mean, he was one of the only congressmen from rural America when he was in the Congress. He chaired the Armed Services Committee. He was a veteran, served, I think, 25 years in the National Guard. So he has this nice personal story, which is one of the reasons that he was picked. But I think on his policy profile, at least since he's been governor of Minnesota, he's been more in the progressive direction, at least on a lot of different issues that Democrats care about. They passed a lot of reforms in Minnesota in his 2 years since he's been the governor. So that may give you some indication, at least on financial services issues, that he might be more to the left of the party, more in the Elizabeth Warren. But again, that's kind of counterbalanced by the bipartisan nature and where he comes from. So it's really hard to know because, as I said, I think, I'm not aware of any public statements he's ever made on the subject. So you're really looking at kind of like a blank slate. I mean, Dina might have more. But it's nothing like, let's say, J.D. Vance, who made public statements advocating for crypto. You knew his position when he was picked. I think it'll be harder to know.
No, I mean, I think that, he is very much a blank slate. I'm not sure this is something that he would take the lead on or put his focus into. So it will be interesting to see, like, kind of what the thinking on this right now. It's, again, still pretty new that he's been named, and so it's still pretty good news, still very new news in terms of like the elections. So I mean, I think I think it should be interesting to watch. I'm still a little bit skeptical about where we're headed with crypto and blockchain, but I do have I do think I think the answer here really is that there needs to be an educational effort with his team and to start that, as soon as possible. So, I mean, they're probably quickly trying to. Adam's probably closer to me, trying to get set up and running and getting like a staff to help them and things like that. So.
Yeah, I would echo that from Dina, and I think that pertains to the vice president as well, who does not have a well-defined platform on crypto and digital assets.
Yeah.
This is the time to be reaching out to them, to be providing that education, to be talking about the jobs that could be created by the industry, the innovation, the ability to help distressed communities, which I think will be a great pitch for the Harris administration to try to get them to be more pro-crypto and digital assets. The ability to influence policymaking is now because they don't have a policy. So you have it's not like an unprecedented opportunity, but it's rare you get this opportunity where there's not any kind of major policy platform.
Yeah, I mean, that's my thought too, is that Walls, he just hasn't been out front. I don't know a lot of the positions that he's taken either on crypto or blockchain. So my view was that, yeah, both teams, depending on, faster rather than slower, it's an opportunity to do a lot of education.
Dina, Adam, thank you both. I want to leave off with one last conversation point. When you're both sitting there at some Friday afternoon in the future, having the beverage of your choice, the cocktail of your choice, and you get the phone call from Treasury Secretary Yellen, who asks each of you, hey, do you think a Bitcoin strategic reserve, a la what former President Trump has mentioned, is a good idea? Adam, what do you say?
I'm a little skeptical only because we don't have strategic reserves really in anything, like, let's say, except oil, which again is more for military, which if we were to be in a war, we want to have this reserve of oil that we could use to man our tanks and our planes. And obviously it's been deployed very successfully by President Biden and previous presidents to lower gas prices at the pump. But let's say say Bitcoin's a commodity. We don't have a strategic corn reserve. We don't have a strategic aluminum reserve. We don't have a strategic steel reserve. So it's just a little hard when you're treating it like other commodities. That's where a little falls down for me. I think it's a great political soundbite because we have all these Bitcoin we've acquired from these enforcement cases.
Right.
What do you do with it? Do you dispose it? When you dispose it, it could affect the market price. But when you're talking about a strategic reserve, the reason for the strategic petroleum reserve is self-apparent. Our tanks run on gas, our aircraft carriers, our ships, our planes,
Yeah.
They don't run on Bitcoin. So,
Dina, what do you tell Secretary Yellen when she calls you?
Yeah, I was going to say it's too soon to say, really. We don't know whether Bitcoin is going to be make sense as a strategic reserve at this time. I think it's something that something that can be.
Sorry, my daughter was interrupting. Please.
I was going to say
we're going to interview her soon too. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say I thought that upset people. That I said there's I think it's a little untested for it to become a strategic reserve at this point. But I mean, it's not of course it's always worth having the conversation. But I think, as I said, I don't think it's quite there yet.
In the words of John McLaughlin back in the day, we're all wrong. It was just fodder for the stump speech. It'll go nowhere. I'm sorry. Guys, we got to leave it there. Thank you, everyone who tuned in. If you've got questions for our experts, Dina or Adam, that we didn't get a chance to get to, please email us, info@wsba.co. We will be back in a couple of weeks. I'm sure it'll be a quiet couple of weeks, Adam and Dina, but we will see then. Thank you for your time. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.